Good morning, everybody, and welcome to PSG of Mercer County. The Professional Service Group of Mercer County is a group that is here for you, anybody that is in any kind of career transition. And as I say every Friday, happy Aloha Friday. So for those of you reading for the very first time, why is this guy looking for a job wearing a Hawaiian shirt? A, I am not looking for a job. And B, I always wear a Hawaiian shirt on a Friday, just my thing that I like to do. You are all welcome to wear something like a Hawaiian shirt or floral whenever you want. People at home, you can as well. And also, today, if you did not know, today is National Superhero Day. So it does celebrate those fictional superheroes, the ones that we've seen on the movies and cartoons and comics. But it's meant to be because a lot of those superhero characters are role models for young people, or in my case, old people. So besides some of them fun to watch, if you're into that, we celebrate superheroes as role models for young people. We do have a lot of resources for you. PSG of Mercer County is here to help you, a job seeker, be more efficient and more effective in your own job search. And among the resources we have, of course, we do have our LinkedIn group. And so you are very welcome and strongly encouraged to join our LinkedIn group. In LinkedIn, just search for us in the group section, PSG of Mercer County. There'll be a join button, and then once you click that, you'll be in pending status, and we do that on purpose. And the reason why is we will check to see if anyone who does request to join has been to at least one of our meetings, either like you here in person or those of you virtually. We're trying just to keep the people that collect names and lists in groups, we're trying to keep those people out. And more, there are lots of spam type requests and such. We want to keep people that are really just serious about job search and interested in helping job seekers. We do have over 1,700 members in our LinkedIn group right now. These are all people that have been to at least one of these meetings. So as you use LinkedIn to maybe reach out to other people to ask questions and support or whatever in your job search, there's a good case that if you reach out to anyone in our group that they'll get back to you because they kind of get it. They understand the importance of LinkedIn and job search and being helpful to job seekers. And if you're new to the group, we encourage you, start contributing. Maybe you'll see a nice post or article that you like. Well, put a comment, say, thanks for sharing, or I really enjoyed that. Or at least click the like button. Be active on LinkedIn. LinkedIn likes active users. And when people are searching for people like you, for a person like you, if they search for you by name, you'll pop right up. But if they're searching for someone like you, looking for an accountant, or looking for a salesperson, an IT person, they come up higher on the list. One of the criteria, you do need to be active on LinkedIn. We do also have our website. Our website is psgofmercercounty.org. It is more than just a landing page. It is over 120 pages of content. We have over 120 web pages on our website. In addition, we have our YouTube channel, and our YouTube channel is accessible, well, through YouTube and also from our website. On the right side of every web page, you'll see a YouTube logo and link. You click on the logo and it will access our YouTube channel. We now have 136 topical videos on our YouTube channel, all recorded from our presentations with our presenter permissions here, all recorded over the last 3.5 years through the start of COVID. So go check that out. You may see a topic of interest that you'll want to visit. And for those of you attending today, you will not have seen that before because this is the first time Ed is doing this program for us. So go check that out. And also, to let you know, we announced last week, starting on July 14th of this year, because somebody asked this year, July 14th of this year, we will be in person only. We will no longer be live streaming our meetings or having virtual meetings. They will all be in person right here in the library, just as we always used to do before COVID and the pandemic. So we will keep our event calendar up, we will keep our emails going out, everything will be the same, and we will encourage you, if you're comfortable, come back in being in person. Those of you who are in person, I guess you are comfortable, so I'm glad that's worked out for you. Okay, so in just a moment I will turn the program over to Ed. Remember, do keep your microphones on mute. You can ask your questions either through chat. If you're asking the question, you want us to read it for you, put the word question in front of it. And the reason why is we want to make sure we see the question, because other people put other chat comments. We don't want to miss or get it mixed up. Or you can simply wait for Ed to encourage you to ask for a question, or just say, excuse me, Ed, I have a question. And I'm sure he'll be able to answer it at that time. With that, PSG of Mercer County is pleased to welcome Ed Samuel, and to welcome you for the first time in person. Welcome back, of course, but first time with us in person. Ed is a career, life, and executive coach, a public speaker, author, certified career assessment, and DISC team leader, and leads a nonprofit stewardship ministry. He is the founder of Sam Nova, Inc., a career coaching and resume services firm in Pennsylvania. His team provides career assessments, resume writing, and career transition support with emphasis on mid to senior level clients across the USA. He specializes in LinkedIn profiles, leveraging networks, targeted job searches, hidden job market, landing a job at age 55 plus, and those looking to make career pivots. Ed has coached over 900 clients and written over 1,500 resumes. He speaks nationally and regionally on all topics related to career optimization. Ed leads executive and small business owner meeting forums each month. He is also a consultant for Penn State University and hosts a Saturday morning radio program on 1180 AM WFYL. Ed has led recruiting teams and has over 30 years of corporate experience at multi-billion-dollar global firms to leading-edge technology startups. He also has held no less than 38 unique paid positions in his career. PSG of Mercer County is always pleased to welcome our good friend, Ed Samuel.
All right, thanks, Dave. Great to be here. Great to be back to New Jersey. All right, so let me talk a little bit more about my story. I did grow up in New Jersey, not too far from Princeton, believe it or not. I was actually born in Princeton Hospital. Worked at many places, including in Europe. Had 3 different kind of careers, a third in finance, a third in operations, and a third in HR. So I had kind of this balanced approach, but I did spend 6 years doing recruiting work and was a recruiting leader for a $1 billion division of a medical device firm. And David just said I held 38 paid positions. One of the positions I held was my very first position. As a freshman in high school, I did my first pivot from a high school student to a paid position on Cleveland Lane, which is about 3 minutes from here. And believe it or not, I was hired as the head gardener of the former Grover Cleveland governor's mansion in Princeton. Who went on to become the president, as we know. So it's interesting. I'm so close by. But at age 46 or 47, I got laid off from corporate America. And when I got laid off, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And spent a couple of months just thinking about things. And then someone said to me, hey, Ed, you really want to take an assessment. Never done one, never even thought of one. But I did do an assessment. And the result of that assessment said, you know what, it makes sense for you to break away and do something completely independent from corporate America. And then, lo and behold, that's what happens. And I founded Sam Nova 15 years later. And we certainly have helped a lot of people over the years now. And I am also a certified career assessment team leader. So this thing about pivots, I'll talk about assessments and how important they are. But 25, I think we're up to over 30 now across the country, people on a virtual basis leading assessment work that becomes pivotal if you're going to make a career pivot. I'm also a published author of Optimize Your Resume Do's and Don'ts. And again, I'm on the radio 8 o'clock on every Saturday morning for 30 minutes. So why do people want to make a pivot? So, when someone decides to make a shift away from their current job into a new kind of job, career, industry, and I really need to modify it because some people are saying I'm going to pivot to remote work only. So not only people are pivoting, their careers, they're also pivoting now where they want to work. And that's a big factor with a lot of the changes that we see. So here are reasons people make pivots: exploration, learning, discovery. Sometimes people make a pivot just to follow their heart. Sometimes people want to just try something out. Sometimes it's very thoughtful. Sometimes it's about finding your true purpose. And I think for me, when I got laid off from corporate America, I didn't know what my true purpose was until I took that assessment and really thought it through. So for everybody, it's a little bit different reason. Now, I put together this chart for the University of Penn. I was asked to speak to one of their largest alumni groups about what happens after you graduate from University of Penn and you're in sports, right? And I think most of us might know that less than 0.2% of anybody who graduates from any university goes on to play professionally. And what's happened is that those alumni, if you will, kind of get lost in the whole job, everything. And I was asked to say, hey, what can they expect to see in their life once they graduate and they don't go on to professional sports of some fashion? So this chart was really put together to say there's a lot of things that can happen that would trigger a potential time for you to ask yourself a question: do I want to make a pivot? So if you look in the center says, hey, you launch your career. And for some of us, and I work with some people every once in a while, they launch their career, they go to a big company, they have multiple growth, expansion, 35 years later, they retire with a pension, or, and then they go to the villages of Florida and drive those golf carts around. And that's what their career was. But it feels rare to me, based on everything that I've seen in the last, especially 20 years. Mergers, acquisitions, a lot of bad bosses out there. They get me out of here. A lot of hostile environments, get me out of here. A lot of poor cultures, get me out of here. But there's economic downturn we're dealing with right now. A lot of people are being let go. But no matter where you fall in this cycle, right, there's a point where something happens to you in your career, and that's an opportunity to say, wait a minute, do I stay on my path? Do I stay with what I've been doing, or do I want to stop? Do I want to make a change? So hopefully, that can resonate. Some of you in this room and on the call probably have experienced some of these things. Now, there's three things that happen on a pivot. The first thing is you're working in a career and a job that you love. And then what happens is that your company, your boss, decides, hey, we have a problem. Somebody just quit. Hey, we have a new product. We can't find anybody. Hey, we need help in this area. And what happens is that they will push you into a role that you may not want to go to. Now, sometimes they push you into a role and it turns out being in a pivot and you like it. But I would tell you, based on the hundreds of people I've worked with, a lot of times when people get pushed into doing something and they feel like they really can't say no, it's usually something that they don't necessarily care to do. So what will happen for some folks, and I worked with so many people where this has happened, and my new boss came in, I love what I did, they pushed me into something, yeah, can I do it? Absolutely. Can I do it well? Yeah. Do I get paid? Absolutely. But is it something that brings out the best in me? Absolutely not. So I get a phone call, get me out of here, right? Because they were pushed into something they shouldn't do. And and shame on the companies that do that without really thinking it through, because they lose a lot of people thinking that everyone was just going to be happy working, simply because they had a need somewhere. Now, the second one is one that's very common, right? That you get laid off, maybe you get fired, there's a downsizing, something happens to you, and now you're a free agent, so to speak. Well, then that's an opportunity for you to then make a decision to pivot. The third one's different. The third one is you're actually in a job, you're getting paid, and you could even be self-employed, but then you think it through. You do an assessment like I did. You did something, and you say, I want to make a change. And I'm going to do it on my terms. And that's when you decide to build a plan, and then you basically quit, resign, and you go do something that you want to do, right? But you're doing it on your terms. 3 ways that pivots occur. Now, I like to say career pivots are easy. So some of them are easy. In other words, you're going to stay in the same family. Hey, I'm in sales, and maybe I want to go to marketing or sales support, right? They're not that hard. Less easy, you stay in the career that you're in, but you shift to a new industry. So let's say if you're in finance or you're in IT, there are certain roles that are out there that are transferable, that you could go to different industries. And people do that. Hey, I've been in pharmaceutical for 25 years. I just got let go. I'm going to make a shift now to building products, right? So it's less, not exactly easy, but a little bit less easy. Now, a little bit hard is when you shift a career and you do it even in your same industry. Hey, I'm in finance and pharmaceutical, and I'm going to go into marketing, right? You're shifting your career to something very different. You could still be in the same industry. It starts to get much harder. Very hard, shift your career and go into a new industry. I'm in finance, I'm going to go to IT. I've been in pharma, but now I want to go, to building products. So every one of these I've seen, I've dealt with people. Some pivots are going to be easy, some are going to be hard. So here's an example. You're a sales rep, you want to shift to the sales support specialist role. Same firm, same industry. Not so hard. Now you're a sales rep, but you want to shift to a new firm, new industry. That can be hard. If you're a sales rep and you've never done medical device sales, that's actually hard. Not even that I know is a tough one to do. But again, if you're really good at sales, you can shift to a new industry, new firm. Now, if you're a sales rep and you want to now shift to a product marketing specialist role in the same firm, same industry, well, that's somewhat hard, but you're staying in the same firm, same industry. Here's one. I'm going to shift my role from a sales rep to a product marketing specialist, but now I'm going to go to a new firm, new industry. It gets a little bit harder now. Here's one. It starts to get pretty hard. I'm a sales rep. I really was born to be an engineer. I'm going to be an engineer. But I'm going to try to stay at my existing firm. Maybe I'm going to go to a new firm. Maybe I'm going to go to a new industry. It gets harder, right? Because you're shifting careers in a bold way. And then last one, sales rep, and you're going to shift to own your own business. Could be in the same industry, could be in a completely new industry, right? So all these shifts, whether they're hard, every one of these as a career coach, I have to analyze, really talk it through to make sure what kind of support someone's going to need, right? So if it's easy pivot, maybe a little bit less support. Hard pivots take a lot based on my experience. Now, one of the hardest is when somebody is in a consulting practice and they want to shift back to a W-2. This gets really hard. At face value, you think that's easy. So here's some factors that I've gathered over the years. If you've run a consulting practice, let's say you were a W-2, you worked for corporate, 10, 15 years, you stopped, and you decided to run your own consulting practice for 10 years. Hey, Ed, I want to get back to a W-2. That can be hard because one of the challenges is that, if you've been in that consulting role a longer period, the harder it will be. If you have not maintained your depth of knowledge in the industry that you used to know, much harder. Have you maintained a strategic network in the industry that you really want to go back to as a W-2? You'd be surprised, but a lot of people don't maintain that network. They don't keep the industry depth that they need to. And then 10 years later, they go to try to make that pivot. It's hard. So I'll explain why it's hard as I go on, why it can be very hard. So I'm going to go over 18 do's and don'ts. There's certainly many more, but these are the ones that I like to focus on with all my clients. Now, the first one is, I'm a big fan of doing an assessment, and before you make the pivot. And you can do it on your own. I always recommend do it with a certified consultant. Do it with somebody who has experience counseling a lot of people on this topic of making a pivot. Any assessment that you do, I believe, should have 4 basic areas. Personality is key to me. Your DNA. Interests, right? What are your interests at this point in your life? What are your skills and abilities? And your skills and abilities have to be looked at in 2 facets. One from a technical standpoint, one from a soft skill, leadership standpoint. And then your values. Values become really darn important. So there's a lot of assessments out there. Berkman is a great assessment as an example. I know many friends of mine who are certified in Berkman, and they do a great job at personality, vocation, and skills, but they don't touch values, right? And values become very, very personal. That's probably why Comcast uses Berkman and not the tool that we use. Because when you get down to a really personal level, I need to be in a job, in a career, within 5 minutes of home, max, because that's where my parents are and they need help. See, most companies don't want to hear that, especially if they have you flying all over the place, right? So some of these assessments become pretty intimate when you start diving into your values. What kind of company do you want to work for? That's another value that comes out a lot. I want to go work for a company that's clean and organized, not like the place I work at today. So some people actually will make a pivot to leave what they're currently doing just to go to another company that is actually more organized. But going back to the assessment that we use, 550 questions, it'll take you 1 hour and 15 minutes to complete, and then we'll sit down and spend 2 hours with you just to review the results and give you our recommendations. But whether you use our assessment, whether you use us, if you do it on your own, try to integrate it together the best you can and go deep in these 4 areas. But I'm making an argument that do the assessment before you make the pivot. Before you resign, quit, go down a path that you find out that, oops, made a big mistake. It lined up really well because I'm making a lot of money from a value standpoint. Oh, I have the skills to do it, and I'm interested in doing it. By the way, the 2 top areas of my personality don't fit it at all. And then you find out that you're miserable, but you're making more money. That's why these assessments, if you look at it from a balanced standpoint, can really be beneficial. So that's certainly something I would encourage you to do. And they're not, in the grand scheme of things, they're not expensive based on what the risk factor is if you make a mistake. Not even close. So here's the second one. When you make a pivot, and let's just talk about not necessarily easy pivots, but let's talk anything less than easy. Recruiters are no longer your friends, as a rule. And people I'll talk to, hey, Ed, I'm trying to move into this. What are you trying to do? I'm pivoting to this. I said, well, no one's calling me back. No recruiter's talking to me. I said, well, show me your resume, right? Well, and first you have to say, no one's going to call you back. If I was a recruiter, I wouldn't call you back. You're pivoting from sales to engineering. You have no engineering experience. I would never call you. You would never even get to a screening. So you have to get out of your head, recruiters are your friends. They're not. And even the ones that are your friends personally, they may not be as much of a friend in this exercise either, because they have to go to the hiring manager who is looking for somebody for this criteria, and you don't have it. So be careful, recruiters stay away as a rule, especially when the pivots become anything other than easy. Now, here's another mistake that's made often. When you're making a pivot to a new career, and let's just say you've just been laid off, and it's not a confidential change, right? You're not working somewhere, you're unemployed, and you're in transition. Perfectly okay to put on top of your resume, I have 25 years of pharmaceutical experience, and I'm pivoting to marketing. Make it really clear up top on that resume in the profile section that you're making that pivot. So when people read your resume at first glance, oh, I get it. There's no experience here that you have that I need, but you're trying to make this pivot. So at least you're planning in someone's mind for the first time, right up front. This person's doing something hard. And it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out, one sentence. Big fan of doing that. And we've done it with all our clients who made pivots to this date. So that's the first thing they read at the top of the resume. Now, if you're not in a confidential search, also make the same bold statement near the top of the header of LinkedIn. Or again, somebody glances at your LinkedIn, they're not going to spend too much time looking at your profile if you don't state that you're making a pivot. Where LinkedIn becomes more challenging is that if you're doing a confidential change, you're working somewhere and you're trying to pivot away from the company, you don't want the company to really know that you're trying to make that change, then you certainly don't want to make that bold statement on LinkedIn. You can still make it on the resume. But if it's not a confidential search, make sure that you let the people know when they're reading their LinkedIn you're trying to make that change. That people will get it. Okay, see what you're trying to do. Now, this is a big one. Do talk to 1 or 2 people in the field before making a pivot. Now, I have a great example of a person right now who has been, let's just say, in customer service at a leadership level for a long time. And they want to make a pivot. We did an assessment. We looked at all the things that this person could possibly do next. And what we fell on, of all things, is a web content editor. Of all things. And this is after taking some thought, doing some research, thinking it through, and then said, you know what, Ed, I want to do it. And I said, okay, before we do anything, I want you to talk to 2 people in my network that are web content editors. And guess what? She just finished talking to one person out in Arizona, a good friend of mine, that's been in the business for 25 years. She said it was an invaluable conversation. Now she wants to talk to 1 more, and then I think she's going to make the decision to go make this shift. And it's going to be fairly dramatic. And again, no recruiter is going to give her time of day based on how her current resume is laid out. So I'm just thinking of other examples that were fairly recent. One was, Ed, I want to be an actuary. Does everybody know what an actuary does? Right? They've been pretty busy of late, right, with COVID, trying to figure out what the car insurance rate should be, life insurance rate should be, right? But when the person had to talk to a good friend of mine who was an actuary, I don't think I want to make the pivot to be an actuary. I think I'm going to go a different route. So sometimes these phone calls can be invaluable. This is way before you quit or resign your job, before you worry about your resume, right? Talk to people. Okay. Here's one. And I repeat this a couple of times, so you have to bear with me. Don't do a pivot unless you're ready to go all in. A half pivot, I don't even recommend. In fact, if you came to me and said, hey, Ed, I want you to help me get there, and I get a sense that you're not committed to doing it, I'm going to let you work with another career coach. I'm not interested in working with someone who's only half committed. Because all that means is that there's a huge chance you're not going to get there and you're going to get rejected. When you go and you start talking to people, you got to go all in. And all in means you have to do all the things I'm going to ask you to do. Not 50% of them, not 75% of them. You do all of them if you want to work with me as a coach to help you get there. That's what going all in means for me. And that's why, taking it a little bit slow and asking some questions, doing a little bit of work, then you can decide to work with me. And in other cases, people they want out and they're working with me and they're going through all the steps, they're committed to that. But be careful that you're not just, fishing around and then trying to make a decision with your career fishing around, because At some point, you have to make the commitment to go all in if you're truly committed to the pivot versus just talking about it. Now, here's one that sounds so simple. I had a person in North Carolina. This was 4 years ago. Wanted to make a pivot. They wanted to make a pivot to become a Salesforce administrator, of all things. From sales to a Salesforce administrator. So this person was, let's just say they were doing more SEO marketing, sales-oriented work. They wanted to make the, so what did we do? We said, well, let's go look at all the jobs that are out there that are sales administrator, and we look at the requirements of those jobs, and then you find out, after looking at a dozen, 95.5% of them, you need this certification, or this one, or this one, or it's a non-starter. Now this person is working full-time for a company. So guess what we have to do? We have to go get that certification before we can even start anything. And just think, if that resume went to a recruiter would just reject it immediately if you don't have the minimum requirements. Now that's just an example, right? But you could use that same premise for everything that you do. Hey, I want to go from, let's say IT, let's say you do IT support and you want to get into the security, IT security. I had a person recently wanting to make that change. Well, it's the same thing. What are the minimum requirements? Because that teaches you a lot. And early on too, because then what happens is you say, well, Ed, if I have to do all that, I don't want to do it. Good, well, let's make the decision now versus getting going and then finding out that it was a mistake. So this one I alluded to, but this one I could just tell you is another, such an important action, because when you don't do this, you're not believable if you're making a tough pivot. Hey, Ed, I'm going to go from public school teacher to an structural design role. I said, okay. So let's work up your resume, but now we go to present you. You have to show something on the resume that you're committed to that pivot. Well, in this particular example, the person, guess what? They had to actually enroll in a class and start taking classes. The person had to go into a professional organization of instructional designers. This person had to connect and network with some additional people. And they had to put something on their resume that demonstrated that they were committed to the pivot. So you could be committed to a pivot, a career pivot, and then if there's nothing on your resume, nothing on your LinkedIn that shows that into the new arena you're going into, you're showing nothing that's demonstratable action. It's a non-starter. So what you want me to do is you want me to hire you on the hope that you're going to get involved in this new career area. I'm never going to hire you because you got to start doing some work here. I mean, it sounds like simple at one level, but you'd be surprised how many people don't think it through this way. Now, this is one which is just huge, right? If you want to make a pivot into a certain area, you have to build relationships with some people who are doing the work. Even if they're not hiring you, even if they don't have any plans to hire you, you have to go talk to the decision makers, the people that you will ultimately be interviewing with. Talk to one or two of them. There's a lot of good people out there, and a lot of people that will take 5 minutes, 10 minutes of their day to give you some career advice if you want to move into their world. And you know the best people to talk to? I talk to my clients about this all the time. The best people to talk to are the very people who did the same pivot you're trying to do 15 years ago. The ones that you probably want to stay away from are the people that went to school, maybe did some public accounting and stayed in their lane for the last 20 years. They only know one world. They don't understand this thing about pivoting anything. Not that they want to talk to you, but go talk to somebody that's done it, right? And build a relationship with you, connect with them. And certainly if you join a professional organization, and then the only people that are there are people that might be your future boss, that's a great way to connect with people, right? If you're making a pivot. I talked to this, but again, there's two pieces. Get formal certifications, start somewhere. And sometimes it's not even the certification, it's also go to school. If you're going to go from sales to, let's say, engineering, well, you better go back to school and start taking some engineering classes. In other words, you have to demonstrate that you're committed to this pivot. And there are people that have done it. Now, it's harder when someone comes to me and they're 64 and they say, hey, I don't want to make a pivot. Then it's a little bit harder going back to school, right? But when someone's 35 talking to us, and want to make a pivot, you have more than enough time. I've had people go back to school at 45, 50. So here's one. Don't tell your boss if you're thinking about a pivot. That's a general rule. This is a general rule. I don't know, I've become a little bit less trusting over the years. Maybe when I had hair, I trusted a whole lot more. But now it's kind of like, look, as soon as you tell your boss, hey, I'm thinking about making a pivot to go do something different, whether it be in the organization, staying with the company, or leaving the company, whatever it might be, as soon as you let your boss know that, as a rule, right, then there's whispering going on in the back room about what you're not going to be asked to do in the future. That's the risk you run. Yeah, but Ed, my boss is such a great guy, great woman, great whoever, great leader. Most of your bosses don't get paid to be your career coach at their own loss. So always be careful of how much you trust your boss at work. And not that they're bad people, it's just they're going to look at their own, they have to look at their own, their own role and their own responsibilities. Now here's one that has happened with a few occasions in the last 5 years. Do research on salary and consult a financial advisor. So again, everybody should understand where they're moving from to. In some cases, a pivot could drop your salary. Some cases, a pivot could keep it the same. Some cases, a pivot could actually increase your salary. But I'm a big fan of everybody having a financial advisor. Something I ask every single client. Because what you don't want to do is make a pivot and then find out that you made a mistake. And then you have egg in your face. Ed, 2 years later, you get a phone call. Oh, Ed, I didn't know. Didn't know what? Well, I have all these expenses. I said, well, did you talk to your financial advisor when you made the decision? And no. And when I say talk to a financial advisor, because I used to be one for UBS, I'm just saying a good financial advisor will look at your whole picture. They'll look at everything that's going to be thrown at you in terms of expenses you're going to incur, what your plans are, and then they throw in this career pivot that you're going to make all at the same time, and then they sit back and look at it and say, what does this all mean? That's what I'm talking about. It's not the 1-800 Fidelity advisor Fidelity on the other end of the line who's just worried about your 401k plan. This is the bigger conversation, right? I'm a big fan of doing that. Now, develop a short-term and long-term strategy if you're making a pivot. If a pivot is really easy, I'm less concerned about long-term, but still, all I'm talking about is think this through. Have a bit of a strategy if you're going to make a pivot. Some pivots are going to take longer than others. Some pivots may have to be in stages. Some pivots, but my big thing is just have a plan. I don't care if it's one sheet of paper. Just don't go on a gut. Because sometimes, your gut could be okay for the short term, but not be so good for the long term. I alluded to this earlier, but say don't interview like you're on a fishing trip. I had a client interview 3 months ago, And when he interviewed like he was on a fishing trip. In other words, he wasn't committed to the pivot. And I said to him in my office, I said to him, if you don't go all in on this interview, they're going to read it from your eyes, your language, how you talk. They're going to read it because I'm reading it. And if you can't pass me, you're not going to pass anybody else. And sure enough, a few weeks later, Ed, I did not get the job. I said, well, why? I didn't go all in, Ed. So just remember, that's really important that people are pretty smart. If you're making a pivot to something, you have to be able to give them that sense that this is for real.
Hi Ed, I'm Patty, and I think if you're not all in, you're not in at all.
Yep, so.
Maybe that makes sense, but.
Yep.
Yeah, I think if you're not all in, you're not in at all. You're either in or out. You're not halfway in.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, thank you. There's a few more. So this is a different twist. You could be all in, but I'm going to give it another slant. I'm going to give you an even more important slant. When you're talking to someone about this pivot, you have to show some type of passion and conviction in your talking with someone. Why do you want to become an instructional designer? You have to tell them why. Why do you want to go to marketing? You've been in sales for 10 years. You've been amazing. Why do you want to go to marketing? So that conviction is how you talk to someone during an interview, showing where it's coming from. So what happens is that when I push people on saying this, well, Ed, I really want to make more money. I go, that's okay, but there has to be more than that for making this shift to this new career family. That future boss needs to hear more. Because remember, they're taking a chance on you. As a rule, they're taking a chance on you. Why should I hire you? You have no experience in this field. So being all in is one thing, that the conviction is the thing that they feel when you're talking to somebody. I was born to be an engineer, but I'm brewing beer today.
That goes the other way, I think.
That is true. That could go the other way too. So that conviction is so important. I just can't tell you. Don't clear a pivot on business till the funding is to go. Kind of goes back to the financial advisor discussion. Don't declare to everybody you're making a pivot and start moving down the whole pivot road when you don't have the funding approved. I've had some people do that. I've had people so far along, ready to hit the go sign to get, and they didn't have the money. That sounds crazy, but it's true. Don't make the pivot if you can't afford it, especially if you're going to start your own business. Do consider phasing a career pivot and continue to work. So again, some people will come to me, hey, I don't want to make a change, I want to leave. I say, well, let's think about it. What you're trying to do is really hard. Maybe what we have to do here is continue to work for 6 months, a year. Then we'll pull the trigger. Maybe it's longer. And that's okay. You're still working towards the pivot. And then when you get there, it's going to be a much more successful exercise. And some people don't want to wait that long. They just want to make the pivot like tomorrow. I get that. But if you're working, you can do. I mean, some people are unemployed right now talking to me. Hey, I just got to let go. I want to go do something different. I said, well, let's talk about it. Well, I can't afford that yet. So what do I say? I say, well, let's go back to what you've been doing for 6 months, 9 months, get some income coming in again, and let's put together a plan to get you to make that pivot. Oh, okay, I never thought about that. Well, that's part of a two-part plan. And here's the last one. If you're going to make a pivot, and I do a separate talk. I'm not sure if I gave this talk at PSG before, but in the last couple of years, I gave a talk, what you should do before you quit or resign. And that's a whole hour, 15-minute talk all by itself. But one of the things that's built into that, right, if you leave a company, try to leave on good terms. And if you leave on really good terms, try to do that. And if you're making a pivot and you're, letting people know, hey, I'm going to try to follow my passion, I'm going to try to follow doing this, leave on good terms, because sometimes the pivots don't work out. For whatever reason, they don't work out. And you have all this experience, you have all these relationships, going back to your old company 2 years later, it didn't work out. Would you entertain bringing me back? And a lot of people who leave on good terms will get brought back, surprisingly. What do you think happens if you leave on bad terms? Or you leave on, you were a bit too boastful terms? All right, now I'm going to talk about success stories, because this is where I'm really going to drive some points home around the things I'm talking about. Here's somebody who went to school as an engineer, worked as an engineer for 2 years, got married, moved down south, and ended up selling Pampered Chef for 7 years. Ended up doing 3 or 4 other different things. Became a school teacher, moved back to Pennsylvania, continued to be a school teacher. So 27 years into her career as a school teacher, well, 20 years into as a school teacher, 7 years Pampered Chef, and I want to become an engineer again. That was hard. That's a hard pivot. Because everything on her resume, right, except for the first 2 years out of school, was school teaching Pampered Chef. So we had to do one heck of a bit of work to try to get flip this switch. But in her mind, and I was born to be an engineer, and life just took a twist. Not that I was fighting it, but it just took a twist, and I went down this path, and here I am, a school teacher. I'm not using everything that I was in me is not coming out. It's just not. Now, in this particular case, this is a much longer story, but I will tell you this. What we ended up doing, we ended up networking ourselves in, because guess what? No recruiter would look at her resume. None. So what do we have to do? We have to network in the people to build a relationship with someone that actually met with her, that then said, you know what? Bringing you as an engineer, I can't do, but bringing you as a second shift production supervisor, let's start there. Guess what happened? That's what she did. Worked 1.5 years, got on first shift to be a packaging person. Still not an engineer yet. COVID hits, company lays her off. This was 1.5 years ago. But guess what she has on her resume now? A bunch of experience in production. It certainly starts to look a lot like an engineer again. For almost 2.5 years. She called me up. A few months later, I just got hired by W.L. Gore, and guess what I am? I'm a full-blown engineer. See how sometimes these pivots are not as clean as go from point A to point B. Here's a person, this was really interesting, right when, this was actually before COVID, believe it or not. 22 years in food distribution. Met with me and said, Ed, I'm really good at operations, Ed, I want out of food. I want nothing to do with food. I'm done. Okay, let's do an assessment. And it was really interesting. What came out the other side of his assessment was he's still very good at operations, liked to work, but he had an opportunity he loved sports and he loved politics. And guess what I had him do? I actually had to go talk to a politician. But what does it really take, right, to be a campaign chairperson and work in a political campaign and actually work in a political office? He did. He also loved sports. He actually talked to a couple of people on major sports venues. And he ended up becoming a director of a consumer products company, fairly close to home. Here's another one. This one's much more radical. Here's a person 30, I want to say 30 years old, 8+ years in school, and he made a mistake. And in Pennsylvania, there are certain mistakes you can never, ever, ever make in the medical world and think that you're going to get licensed. And he made it. He'll never become a doctor because of the mistake that he made. Then he met me and he said, hey, Ed, what else can I do in my life? Went through an assessment. And come to find out, he liked animals maybe just a tad more than he liked human beings. And he liked being out and about. And what we ended up with is, of all things, become a canine police officer. So guess who's a canine police officer today? Right? You talk about pretty hard pivots. And he had no real, let's say, experience, even on his resume type of thing, right? Here's another person, quality control manager, laid off a second time in corporate America, and then finally said, you know what, I'm done with corporate America. What else can I do? We actually did an assessment. We came out the other side, and you know what? You might have been born to be self-employed. And she ended up buying a cost reduction franchise and is doing incredibly well. Not easy, but doing incredibly well, all considering what she's doing now. But she's not working in corporate America. But she actually used a lot of her skills that she learned in corporate America to buy a franchise that kind of leveraged those skills, right? Here's one fairly recent bank manager wanted out of retail banking. And in this particular case, went from W-2, paid fairly decently, to a property and casualty agent on 100% commission, right? So some people make that shift too. Hey, I want to go do this career pivot, and they're willing to walk away from W-2 salary to go into a commission world. But that leverages the best of who she is in that particular case. Here's another one. Maybe because of my faith background, I work with more pastors than you could possibly imagine. Here's a pastor, 25 years in Ohio, and I went out. I believe I did what I needed to do, and I'm not looking back, but my future is not going to be tied to a church or what I've been doing. What else can I do? And this was more difficult because not only did you want to make a pivot, you also want to move to a whole other state. And those, from a career coaching standpoint, can be a little bit harder when you're helping somebody make a pivot and move to another state at the same time. He's now with doing business development work for a major nonprofit. Here's one where this is an example of a person who was killing it. For, if I said the name of the company, everyone would know it. Strategic account manager for $1 billion accounts, killing it. And this was one of the people that got pushed into a role that made no sense. And they did, pushed her into a role, made no sense. There a year, called me up, Ed, get me out of here. They didn't care about what I wanted. Big company, I make a lot of money, but they don't care. They just pushed me into a role. You're good at it, that's where I need you, sorry. Called me up. Not only did this person make the pivot, our plan was to pivot back as a strategic account manager, but not only did we make the pivot, we made a pivot to a new role into a completely new industry, and she got a pay increase. But see, this pivot was different, right? Because the person was pushed into something that they never wanted to be pivoted into. Now they want to go back to what they're good at. I told you I'd talk about beer. We're going to talk about beer. So here's a person who went to school as an engineer, first job out of school, and a lot of college grads, this is a mistake that happens a lot. You get your degree, and then you can't find a job right away, and then you say yes to anything because you have bills to pay, right? And then what happens is that 4 years later, you're in a job, and you're not an engineer. And you're with a company that also just happens to brew beer. And the person was so good at doing packaging work for them, but not engineering work, they said, would you like to brew beer? Now, this person ended up starting brewing beer for like 4 years, 5 years. And then I got a phone call from his dad. Here's my son's story. He wants to pivot to what he really wanted to be coming out of college. Now, 10 years later, we're not there yet. Can you help me?
This doesn't make sense. If you're in the beer business, you want to move to wine and not into engineering.
Oh my gosh, I know. But believe it or not, he, now, do you think a recruiter would look at his resume? Not a chance. So we ended up having to go talk to a decision maker in a manufacturing company. And it was really interesting. The very first question he was asked, why do you want to be an engineer? You've spent 10 years not being an engineer. And I coached him hard on how to answer that question. And he ended up, taking on a role as an engineer. This one was even more dramatic. This is a person from New Jersey in healthcare, early career, and moved to another state, and wasn't sure what he wanted to do, but he knew he did not want to be in healthcare. We did the assessment. What came out the other side was, what's the one area that he should probably not be doing in at all? Healthcare. What should he be in? Well, when you looked at who he was and what really drew out the best of him, it was pretty clear, a financial services type role would be it. And again, his resume was meaningless almost, and no financial services background. And by the way, he had a history degree. We'll throw that in for good measure. But when you looked at who he really was and what he could really excel at, we said, well, let's focus on financial services, and made one phone call. That's all it took, to one company that got him in the door. And I said, here's what's going to happen. When you sit down and you talk about this pivot that you're doing, the very first question that's going to be asked of you is, why are you leaving healthcare, and why financial services? And he came armed with exactly how to answer that question. And part of his question, I did a thorough assessment of who I was and what I bring to the table, what brings out the very, very best of me. And it wasn't healthcare. You know what it was? It was finances. It was compliance. It was me being me being my introverted self, where I can be focused on my work. And he gave a couple of other points, and she looked right at him and goes, I believe you. Let's continue. You see, this is how the conviction is so important when you're making a pivot. See, if they don't believe that part of you, everything else is just window dressing, just going through the motions, and you're not going to get anything.
First, you have to believe in me, for convincing the others to believe in you.
One second.
I think first you have to believe in you, for convincing others to believe in you.
Absolutely. You have to convince.
Yeah. First you have to trust in me, for convincing others.
So here's another question.
Yes, I have a question. I'm pivoting, and I started off as a journalist for major TV shows, and then I taught after that when journalism changed. And now I find I have a master's degree from Columbia, so I was teaching, and now they don't hire master's degrees. It's like a memo went out to all of the colleges, and they only hire PhDs, which journalists don't really go towards PhDs. We go towards the First Amendment. So right now I'd like to go into diversity and inclusion, but I don't have HR background. So what would you recommend for that? I did take a course in diversity inclusion for HR. So is that kind of the right pathway to take a course?
Yeah, it is. The fact that you took a course was right along with my line of thinking. If you have to demonstrate something, there's organizations you could join and start rubbing shoulders with. And the nice thing about diversity, equity, and inclusion is it's more of a, it's not like you're going into medical sales. There's something that says that part of who you are, what you believe in, your passion, your commitment, and why you're doing it, that becomes a pretty big reason in terms of making that pivot. The fact that you have formal education is a good thing. The fact that you are able to teach people over the years is a good thing. You have some transferable skills there. And then just learning that space will take you some time. So I think you are moving in the right direction. And I don't think it's, is it easy? No. Is it super hard? I don't think you're at the super hard one. You're probably kind of right in the middle, leaning towards even harder, but you're kind of right there. Here's a few more.
Oh, excuse me. As a reminder, folks, for those of you here, please use the microphone to ask the question. We want to make sure that the people attending virtually hear your questions as well. So that's why we do it, not for any other reason. Good. Thank you.
So you'd be surprised at how many people I have worked with who are pastors who have come to me and say, Ed, again, the same thing, 25 years, I want out. What else can I do? I have one particular pastor that I worked with 7 or 8 years ago. Met with him. We did the assessment. He was a good preacher. I've heard him preach unbelievably. Very well spoken. But when I met with him, it became as clear as day. Being a pastor was the last thing I would be recommending to him, ever. This person was so smart intellectually from terms of just the math, the financials, just brilliant. And I said, I'm going to recommend a couple of things, but the thing that I'm going to recommend to you that comes out flying is a financial advisor. Now, this is a pastor with a W-2 salary, right? And the financial advisors, most of them are, right, unless you work for Wells Fargo on a call center or Vanguard, they're going to be 100% commission. Well, guess who's like number 7 in the entire United States of America within the security and banking system? This person made the pivot. So some pivots bring out the best of who you are, even though it doesn't even look like it at face value. And a lot of the steps we talked about, he did. Like almost all of them. Now this one was fairly recent. Here's the general manager of, everybody here at Boston Market, right? For 10 years, killed it. When the CEO of Boston Market went to McDonald's, he went out of all of America, picked him, and said, I want you to come to McDonald's now, and he did. But it was interesting, 19 years into his career at McDonald's as a general manager, something's been gnawing at him, saying, I can do this, and I can probably do this for the next 20 years and retire. And he said, you know what? I love people. I love the human resource aspect of it, the organizational design, the dynamics, the talent development. All of that, that's what I love. And what he did is exactly what I talk about. He went off to school to get his MBA in what? Human resources. So halfway through his MBA, or near the end of his MBA, he called me up, Ed, I'm making this pivot. Can you help me? But see, his resume, he didn't have HR experience, right? He had GM experience. And then you had to parlay off. Some of it was HR oriented. But then when he showed the commitment of getting that degree, and then we had to work really hard. Really hard. Recruiters didn't want to touch him. But we worked hard, and he ended up landing, and we were ready to even take some detours. We ended up landing on a human resource role in Philadelphia that was a full-fledged HR manager role. And now he's been there for over a year now and doing well, right? Here's another one, which is this is what happens in companies all the time. This person's a nurse navigator. A nurse navigator, for those of you who may not have heard the term, think of it as the COO of the surgery room. So there's, here's the heart surgeon, and then it's not like the heart surgeon's not worried about all the supplies and all the people. There's the heart surgeon, and then there's the person that makes sure everything else is in place. That's what the nurse navigator does, and they get paid quite a bit of money. She worked so hard for this organization for so long and was positioned so right to become that next level, that director level role that she was gunning for. Everyone's pushing to have her fill this role. The role opens up, she interviews, everything's in motion, and all of a sudden crickets. 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 What happened was she didn't get the job. And her boss was quiet. Didn't say a word. And I looked at her and I said, you know something, I've been around too long. There's always something behind this story. Nothing smells right. Well, they brought in somebody from the outside to take the role. And then she called up, Ed, I want out of here. I worked my heart out for this company for so long. For this role, I was mentored for the last 2 years to go to it. And then he gave it to somebody from the outside. I want out. And I understand that's sometimes you want out because something like that happens. There is the rest of the story, but let's just say it was politically oriented. Let's just leave it at that. But what happened was, Ed, I do not want to be a nurse navigator under any circumstance, ever. Well, guess what? We looked at it, we took a look at her skills. Now she works for a healthcare concern that touches hospitals. And she's the only clinical outcome specialist this company even has around the. And she's able to then talk to nurses and talk to hospitals in ways that she could never have done. And she's touching a lot more lives in a different way. More. Higher education. Here's one, higher education. Here's a person who's a director of higher ed. There was probably only 7 people in the world that could claim what she does in higher ed. That's how big her program was. But yet, the university system suppressed her and kept her at this spot. It says, right where we're going to keep you. They weren't interested in growing her. And she called me up and said, Ed, I want out of higher ed. And higher ed is just a really interesting world. Not only did we do the assessment, we also then said, she left higher ed and she ended up becoming a marketing director, and she's never been a marketing director ever in her entire life for a nonprofit, and got almost a 30% increase in pay, right? So this is a classic case of making a pivot to something different, but also salary goes up, and now she's doing something that really resonates with her. And by the way, this nonprofit actually ties into why she went to school originally. So there's a lot of things you could go back to the future on, right? You hear a common theme with me. People start out with a passion, then everything happens, and you're here. And then when you go to make that pivot, you're making that pivot back to something that you really cared about to begin with. And then last one, this was an easy pivot. This was an easier pivot. Somebody who's been in HR and more of an HR partner role and stayed in HR. And all we did is we just pivoted to a different kind of an HR role, making almost the same amount of money, but in a different role, in a different industry he's never touched before. And it's 100% remote. And he's killing it. He loves it. Now, as I close here, just remember everything I talked about, the examples I shared. You heard examples where people were pushed, then they pivoted back into something different. Then you have other people who are in transition. And you have other people, quite a few, if you heard me, fell into number 3. Quite a few, just in the examples that I shared. A couple things. I'm on Optimize Your Career tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. I'm actually doing I'm going to re-air a piece that I did recently on interview success stories using the STAR. The STAR, if you've ever heard of the STAR technique, and you throw in the T at the end. If you want to listen to it, it's tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, 8 to 8:30. Now, later tomorrow morning, I'm actually going to be in Great Careers. If you know Lynn Williams, a friend of mine, and I think a friend of yours, 9 to 10:30, I'll be talking about optimizing your job search do's and don'ts. I'm going to be using a very unique format tomorrow. 100% audience participation. For those, it's 100% virtual, but it's 100% audience participation using a polling for each slide that I'll be talking to. So it's going to be a very unique format. I cover a lot of ground. And then every Tuesday, 11 o'clock, I'm on this thing called Clubhouse, which is the cell phone only audio program with Charlotte Taylor, a good friend of mine, career coach from Florida. And we're going to talk about, so you landed the job, now what? Which sometimes often gets missed. If you're on the call listening, if you're here today, I did publish my book, Optimize Your Resume. And I will give a $5 instant rebate if you order it from my website. And I have I brought a few copies here in Princeton if you're interested in it. We have a really neat job search assessment tool at our website. So if you want to kind of go to our website and go to services, take the job search assessment. It'll take you 5-10 minutes, and I think you'll find it helpful. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. I have 26,000, almost 200 first connections on LinkedIn. One of the reasons people want to work with me at times is because I can connect with people. I tend to know people in states that you would say, wow, yeah, I know more CFOs in Texas than I do anywhere in the country, right? How did that ever happen, right? So feel free to connect with me. And with that, I'm going to close.
Hey Ed, I'm Bill Pakula, and it was a great presentation. Two questions came to mind, and I'd like, since I got you, I might just as well ask them. The first was, it's just a comment following up on Monica's question, was that before you convince others, you really have to believe yourself. So, I mean, to me, it seems like the assessment it's a piece of data, but then you got to convince yourself that you believe it. Do you have any comments on that?
No, I think you're 100% right. When sometimes there are people who are convinced they want to do it, but then when I start laying out, here's all the things you got to do. And by the way, one of the things that people have to do is convince their spouse or significant other that they're supportive. You'd be surprised at a lot of people that get shot down because they're not getting the support that they need. And I'm okay with that because you really need support on the home front if you're in that situation. If you're single and all you have is a cat or a dog, then it becomes less of a conversation. But at least you're absolutely right. You have to be convinced that you're willing to do it. But for me, it's all it boils down to. The convincing for me is you have to do the work. And when you don't want to do the work, then I'm convinced you're not convinced. That's the best way to answer it.
Let action. Develop the job.
Can't hear you.
Monica, please.
You have to do your job. You have to do your job.
That's right,
If you
yeah.
do a vacancy, you have to, what you do, what you want to do.
Absolutely. You have to do the work.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's it.
Okay, the second question is a little bit more mundane, but when early on you talked about make sure that you have the minimum requirements for the job. Sometimes it seems like job requirements, when you see online, you see that they started, hey, we have an opening, and then they route it around the company, and Every manager must add, it seems like it's a discipline. You have to add something. So in the end, you end up looking at a laundry list of, and it doesn't, how do you sort out what's relevant and not relevant?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think that's one of the reasons you want to go talk to, and I recommend talking to the people that have actually made those pivots in the past. What did it take for them to do it? Because they were in the same situation that you're in. And they're going to tell you, well, I had to go get this certificate. I had to go join this organization. I had to go speak to these two decision makers. And maybe instead of pivoting at this level, I had to change my perspective and I have to pivot down a notch or two to get my foot in the door to then work my way up. So it really depends. Those conversations really are so vital in making that decision whether you can meet those minimums that they set. And usually a hiring manager will tell you that. The biggest problem that you're going to be faced with is that you're trying to make the pivot somewhere. And they say, well, we need 5 years of experience in this, and you have no years. That becomes harder because, well, a lot of people can't do well, and I can't go into an unpaid internship and work there for a year, right? So then you have to get people who are willing to take a chance on you. And all I'm saying is there's a lot of people out there that are willing to take chances on you, but you got to do all these other things I'm talking about and then make your case. And if they believe you, you know, I was just thinking about this, driving over here. That conviction I talk about, making that case, I've worked with a lot of people that have come out of the federal prison system with felonies. And these are really smart, good people that made a huge mistake, and they paid for it. But it's interesting. It's the same conviction that I coach them to make to someone to take a chance on them. That's why people pull the trigger and make a chance on them, take that chance on them, because they actually believe that they made that they're convicted to go do something, right? And that's a much more harsh pivot, right? Alex.
Ed, first of all, a compliment, big compliment. You covered this topic very, very well. I loved every minute of it. One thing was missing big time for me. You never use the word age. You know, I work with people, and when I do, I put them in 3 buckets, 20-something to 35. Second bucket, 35 to 50-something. And the third bucket is 50-something plus. And you know, one person in one bucket has no idea what the other person is thinking and how they're processing this information. And this is what you talked about today is very, very applicable. I loved it. But every person in one of my 3 buckets sees what you said today in a very, very different way. Are we on the same page on this? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the fundamental 18 points that I made are going to apply to all 3 groups. Who you're talking to might change, but I would say that all the things I said in terms of those 18 points are going to apply to somebody who's 64 as they will 35, as they will 21 in terms of doing that work that I'm explaining. I think where the difference lies is that if who you're talking to. So if you're talking to someone who you're trying to make a pivot and you're 64 making a pivot and you're talking to someone who's a 31-year-old that's only known one little path of their career so far, that becomes much more challenging than perhaps talking to somebody who's 55 and can understand it more. So I think your point's well made in terms of perhaps who you target to build relationships with and making that pivot.
Everything is about motivation. I can share with you that I recently worked with a gentleman. He was 82. And I said, why do you want to make a change? Alex, the job is so boring. I need something different. Oh my God, this is unbelievable. So motivation. A person, let's say a woman is 24 and she lives at home and she is dying to live in the city where all the other people her age are. The motivation is very different. So yes, age has something to do with it. That's
I'm sorry.
all.
Yeah, thank you. If you go to our website, and you go to any one page, you go to the very bottom, you'll see YouTube videos. You're going to actually see YouTube video of somebody who approached us at the age of 77 as a consultant who wanted to go back to work as a W-2. And he actually is on video. We recorded a little bit of his story in terms of making that shift. And to Alex, to your point, in order for him to do that at 77, those 18 things I talked about, we went through every single one of them. And I told him I wouldn't accept him as a client if he wasn't willing to do the work. That's another factor when it comes to age.
Yep.
And I've had some people say, I can't do it. I said, well, you can't hire me as a coach. Because you have to do these things, because what you're doing is doubly hard because you're 77. And he did land a job. And that's kind of you'd have to listen to the video to hear the whole story. But thanks again for sharing that.
So I'm in bucket number 3. But one thing I found when I'm pivoting is I'm overqualified. Now, sometimes that's covering ageism, but a lot of times I am overqualified if I'm looking for something in the discipline that I work in, but it's in another industry, it's lower down, and I don't need to make as much money because I have worked with a financial planner. So what I need to do is to convince them I'm not a flight risk. I'm not just stepping into this to make some money while I'm looking for something else. And to do that, you have to show that commitment. You have to show them that this is something that you have some passion in for whatever reason. But you have to be convincing or they'll just pass you over. And if they don't bring it up, you have to bring it up because it's still a concern, right? You might do a great interview, but they have this thing, this guy is overqualified. And if you don't speak to it, they're not going to hire you.
So I could give a whole 2-hour talk on ageism and how to fight ageism, in the job market. And I will tell you unequivocally, ageism does exist. And what happens on career pivots or whether you were unemployed when it comes to ageism, no matter what you do, no matter how many Ed Samuels that you hire, it won't matter. Because they're not going to hire you whether you do a pivot or not a pivot because age is such a problem for them. So I say if you go after 10 people and you're going to make a career pivot and let's say you're 65, I would make an argument 50% of them are going to discount you no matter what we do. But the other 50% will give you a shot if you have everything lined up. But then to your point, when you go in there to have the talk, that conviction that it's okay, I don't want to be the vice president,
Right.
and that you've convinced them that your runway is not another year and a half, but another 10 years.
That's the other piece. How long?
Because no one's going to hire you to invest in you to see you retire a year. It's a non-starter. So that conviction that you're bringing up is equally as important in that case.
Yeah, that's a good point. The last one about the runway. They don't want you to retire. Yeah.
And you have to say it.
Oh yeah.
Most of the people who don't do well when it comes to their age in interviews, I always say this, it's not what they said during the interview, it's what they did not say during the interview. And that's always the fail, will always come up to bite people.
Yeah, it's tempting. You don't want to bring it up. You think if you can avoid it,
That's right. And a lot of people don't want to ask you the question. Because legally, in some place, you get yourself in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, when are you going to retire? Well, some people, laugh at it, but a lot of people won't. So if you don't state that, you get yourself in trouble. So
yeah, they'll ask you, how do you see yourself in this role? Where do you see yourself going in the next 5 years? That's their way around it.
That's the way around it. But you got to have a good answer, and that conviction has to be real.
Hey Ed, it's Alan Kirshner. I'm also a career coach, and yesterday, as a matter of fact, I was talking to 2 people that I'm going to be working with that are doing pivots. So I really wanted to compliment you and say that I liked your methodical approach to doing this, because it's something that you need to be, thinking about and taking steps toward doing, because it can be a significant pivot or it can be something that's not as big. So thank you for all the information you shared. I certainly have takeaways from it.
Super. And I will say that since COVID has hit, 1 out of every 2 clients who have called us either have made or have showed interest in making a pivot. and it was never that high prior to COVID. 1 out of 2. So it's out there.
Hi, Jenny. I was just curious in terms of, it seems like an uphill battle to land the job of your dreams or follow your true career path and a pivot. If you're struggling with unemployment, or you've been laid off, or you're in the midst of leaving a toxic work environment. But when you have that interview, as you mentioned, with the person wanting to be an engineer, who had been brewing beer for 10 years, organizing the beers at the warehouse, and you had mentioned, you really set him up with how to answer the question, why do you want to be an engineer? And it's really, fine dance for someone to really try to leap or reach for the stars, pursue their dream without being fluffy. And how do you resolve that in an interview type setting with a potential employer?
Well, I think you make a good point. Part of your conviction, if you're younger, right? If you're younger in your career, that's what you're doing. You are reaching for the stars. You're reaching to get to that better place. I think you have to be careful with the words that you use, but you have to show people that I'm committed to getting to a place that's going to bring out the very best of me. From a technical standpoint, in terms of who I am, from a DNA standpoint, from a personality standpoint, from a life standpoint. And if you can kind of deliver that message that you're committed to get to that better place during that interview, and people can feel that, it becomes convincing. And I think it can make all the difference, Jen, in terms of how you come across. By the way, same thing for the 77-year-old. When we coached him in terms of what he had to say, you better believe he had to do a lot of convincing to say that I'm committed for the next 10 years. I'm 77. The irony of that situation was he actually interviewed for a director level role. He was the finalist. Did incredible, just blew everybody away in how well he was doing. And he called me up. It was like a Friday. He called me Friday, Ed, I have bad news. I didn't get the job. I said, worked so hard. We went right to the final stage. Age was never brought up per se in any of the conversations. Monday morning, he calls me up. Ed, you're not going to believe this. I go, what? They said they liked me so much they created a senior manager role just for me, and there's no interview, and they're going to hire me the following week. Right? And that's all because of what you just asked. He showed that conviction. And for him, if you ever met this man, it's his dream job, right? It was exactly what was for him. So.
Ed, isn't that the reason to take every interview you can get and show them what you got? And you never know what's out there in terms of new jobs because they see how good you are.
Well, absolutely. I mean, for every interview you go on, whether you stay in your lane and you make a career pivot, the goal is to actually show the very best of you. And if you've been in your lane and you're outstanding in your lane, then talk about that and why you love your lane. So you're right, John. That conviction should come across in general terms, for all interviews.
Ed, thank you very much. This has been great.
Thanks, John.
Well, Ed, thank you very much. I'm so appreciative. This was a terrific program. One thing that I was a little surprised at, I thought it was a natural pivot for the student to become a brewmaster. Students have a lot of experience with beer and wine or anything else. And really what it shows you, this program, it's powerful in so many ways. You don't have to focus on what you used to do. And if you like what you're doing or what you just came out of, that's fine, but you don't have to. And Ed has given us some really practical advice for helping us understand, what do we really want to be when we grow up, whether you're 37 or 77. And so this is really very strong and powerful. So, whether you're 37 or 77, you should do an assessment. Maybe you figure out I'm perfect where I am and career-wise, or there is a pivot to be made. Talking to the two people, make sure you understand, especially as you move into new areas, and make sure you understand the minimum requirements, not just of the new type of position if you're pivoting. What if you've been in someplace, like Ed talked about, people being in a job for 35 years? Maybe that company hasn't moved as quickly as the industry. So make sure you understand what the minimum requirements are now. And if you need, get some training or whether a degree or certification to keep yourself as current in the industry as possible. For anyone interested in learning more about certifications or training, our PSG of Mercer County website actually has a link. So if you look at the website, the menu at the top has a link called Professional Services. And in there, Professional Development, and in there is a link called E-Learning. And when you click on the E-Learning link, there are 91 links to 91 e-learning websites. They're not all free, not all of them are going to be the right ones for you, but there's one-stop shopping to find 91 different e-learning. You can get certifications, you can get new degrees. You figure out how to use that best for you, but we kind of consolidated it for you. So go take a look. So once again, Ed, thank you so much, not just for presenting to us, but clearly being a very good friend and supporter of job seekers. And Ed's presented lots of groups before, so thank you very much for that. And as we move forward in the next couple of weeks, I guess Coach Month or Coach Time continues. Next week, John Hadley will be here. John Hadley is a career coach as well, and John will be talking about build your interview skills. So that's what John will be talking about. John will be right here in person, so for those of you who will want to talk with John afterwards, you'd have the opportunity because he will be here. And then May 12th, Alex Freund will be here. Alex Freund, also a career coach. Alex Freund's actually here now in the back. He's the gentleman over there in the green sweater. Branding for landing. So how do you promote yourself properly so that you can land that right position? So we have coaches galore visiting us. And then other programs, in case you're interested, our cousin organizations, PSG of Morris County meets on Wednesdays, psgmc.org, Wednesdays at 9:30, but you can sign on as early as 8:30 in the morning to have some virtual networking. And also PSG of Central New Jersey, psgcnj.biz meets Mondays at 10:30, and they also open their electronic doors a little bit early as well. So go check out those groups and others as well. So thank you everyone for attending. Glad you were able to join us in person today. And for those of you visiting virtual, glad you were able to join us as well. And I'll simply say until we see you next time, virtually or in person, bye everybody.